Street Fighter 6's drive mechanic has been revealed and detailed, and thankfully, it looks like it's not going to have as much emphasis on comebacks as, well, more recent Street Fighter titles have had. We get into the details of how this mechanic works, what it implies for Street Fighter 6 gameplay, possible problems, and more, all in this week's episode of Talkin' Block. We have the Street Fighter 6 gameplay trailer. Now, we already did one segment on this, but that was just a broad general reaction before we really had some time to sink our teeth into it. And we're going to sink our teeth into it here with you guys. But first, please like, comment, psycho crush the like button. Give us a subscription if you haven't had it, or you haven't had the chance to yet. We really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Okay. I am cautiously excited about what I've seen from the gameplay thus far, and specifically I want to get into the mechanic, the drive system, which will be of course a core part of what gives Street Fighter 6 its gameplay identity. John, what's your initial reaction to what we've seen with the drive system thus far?
I really like it. Basically, they took what people like in Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 3 and put it into this game, but I'm also not optimistic at all about the balance of this game from the get-go, because when has a vanilla version of Street Fighter been well balanced and well thought of? Never. That is your answer. It never has happened. It's not going to happen this time. Temper your expectations. Enjoy the game for being fun. Don't enjoy it for its balance, because that ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when we, as always, things come out and they do their best to, like, okay, well, we don't have a move that kills you in one hit, but once you put it in the hands of the community and people start figuring out, okay, here's where it's broken, here's a hole, here's a leak, and things get patched and fixed over time, sure. And so let's expect that. But I am excited because what we don't see here very much of is comeback mechanic. There's a mechanic and there's a lot to it, but on the surface it does not look like a comeback mechanic in the same way that we saw comeback mechanics exist in Street Fighter 5 and Street Fighter 4. Now, it very well might manifest to be more like that, but with what we've seen so far, it starts like you start and then you don't necessarily get rewarded for getting hit. Now, let's start with Street Fighter 4. People had issues with the comeback mechanic in that game, which of course was the Ultra Meter. You got your own, it was basically a second super, think of it that way, but it was completely tied to getting hit, absorbing fireballs, absorbing attacks and whatnot, and once it passed a certain amount, you got access to this big, awesome hitting combo, usually started out with invincibility frames. People didn't like it. John, why?
They didn't like it because they felt it was scrubby, but much like when supers were introduced into Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo way back in, I think it was 93, 94, people thought it was scrubby as well, because you could drain 50% of your opponent's life by, basically getting hit or doing, specials and other stuff like that. Basically, when something is new and people aren't familiar with it, it's scrubby and crappy. That's pretty much what it comes down to. So.
Sure. Well, okay, so then we had years and years with it, and then the Ultra combo didn't come back. How did you feel about Ultras when it got to the end of Street Fighter 4's life?
They were mostly fine because Capcom reduced the damage down on them, and I got used to them. But I think that the V system is in Street Fighter 5 is far superior than that. So.
Okay, very different, right?
Yes.
But and I think there was certainly a place for Ultras. I don't think they were as intrusive as some of the things that the V system in Street Fighter 5 led to being. I think that there was a lot more like a crazy imbalance because of a lot of those kinds of things. But and we can transition right into that too. The V system, there is a lot of components to that, just like we're seeing. There's 5 components to the drive mechanic, but far and away the biggest, most impactful part of the V system was V triggers, and you could get to V triggers by either using your V skill, and some characters could do that all day long, and then other characters, their V skills were total crap and they could find very few instances to use them. The other way, and the more used way for sure, was if you took damage, your V meter went up. And what ended up happening was when V triggers, anytime a V trigger was incredibly strong, and we saw a lot of instances of that, especially Season 2, Season 3, G, and it's been dealt with quite a bit over the years. But to the degree that V triggers were overpowered, the comeback, the robbery V triggers, it almost felt as though the rest of the round lost gravity, lost importance. And I don't want to say didn't matter, but lost importance, because it really came down to, did the V trigger sequence work or not? And you don't want that, because it becomes unidimensional. Famously, in season 2, Balrog, Tokido said it, the round didn't start until V trigger came into play. But John, you're not as worried, or you don't have as much of issue about the comeback mechanic of Street Fighter V as you did with 4. Tell me about that.
It's comeback mechanics are designed to create hype and to keep the round close. And no developer out there, in my opinion, is ever going to make a game without that, because we've had many years of lack of comeback mechanics, and you might have some hype come from that, you might have some energy come from that, but overall, developers are always going to do the rubber banding method, right? Where if someone's so far ahead of the other player, they're going to want to get some other hits in there and other stuff like that. And I can't see a modern fighting game ever not having that system in there. It just depends on how advantageous that system is. How much are you closing the skill gap when someone runs away with stuff? So I personally feel like Street Fighter 6 is going to have it. We just don't know exactly how it's going to manifest itself just yet.
I think it's probably going to be tied to whatever the super is, because as we'll get into here, the EX moves are not tied to whatever that meter is. They're tied to this drive system. So I assume that you'll have a super bar, and essentially, as far as I can tell right now, it's going to look and act in the way Ultras did in Street Fighter 4. It's that you'll have this really powerful move, and it'll build up probably as you dole out damage or take damage. And then you can choose to use it whenever, once it's past a certain amount or once the bar is full. But I do have a note here in regards to comeback mechanics that they're not matter of fact wrong or bad, but they can easily mute or invalidate efforts of skilled players. And when that happens too much, when it just becomes like, well, but the mechanic comes in and just overshadows or eclipses all the skill that you're going to try to apply or everything that led up to this point, that's not a good look. And it looks as though that's not as much emphasis is put on that in Street Fighter 6. So let's get into it a little bit and talk about the 5 aspects of the drive system. John, do you want to dive into that for us?
So first up, we've got Drive Impact. That's the closest thing to Focus Attack. It's activated with the heavy punch and heavy kick, like V-Trigger was. So this is a universal mechanic. Everyone's going to have it. And it actually has a guard crush, which causes a wall splat when you get it into the corner. And then I'm really actually curious, because you can absorb a single hit with this, is what they say. I'm actually curious if we're going to have armor breakers to counteract it. And then will we have invincible backdashes come back to prevent the guard break from being too good? Because that is actually what Capcom had to do with the Focus Attack in Street Fighter 4. They made invincible backdashes, which a lot of people do not like, and I'm not a big fan of them, even though I abuse the heck out of it with Rose. It's an interesting thing. Like, what's going to come back to it? But it costs a single bar. Maybe you have to commit. We don't know how much you have to charge up the move to make it a armor breaker or a guard breaker, I should say.
Right.
And can you even dash out of it like you could the Focus Attack? Right. That's a big thing. Where if you in Street Fighter 4, if you wanted to wind up your focus and like it wasn't looking good, you could just backdash out of it. Right. And like, oh, no big commitment here. With this, you're spinning a bar. Maybe you're locked into the animation no matter what. Like, there's a bunch of things we do not know yet.
And even those little things, like whether or not you have to commit to all of it, if you can dash out of it, that's going to make it very distinct, depending on how they choose to handle those, very distinct from what Focus Attack was, even though it's definitely a cousin of Focus Attack. There's no two ways about it. But and as far as that backdash, yes, I think that's why it was in there in Street Fighter 4, was to counteract, because as soon as we learned, when I was first starting the game, as soon as we learned that you could do this unblockable attack, well, we were just knocking people down and then timing a focus attack, and for a while that works, right? And then you realize, oh, you can backdash it, you can do an EX reversal, something like that. But the second part of the drive system is a parry, and no, we don't know how fast they are, we don't know how useful they'll be, but I would say you can probably parry Drive Impact, and if that's the case, maybe we don't need to have invincible backdashes. But tell us about parry.
Yeah, so Drive Parry is close to Third Strike's parry, but it's done with the 2 medium buttons, like what the V skill button is right now in Street Fighter 5. So
I think of it as Alex's V trigger 1 parry, as far as this part of it goes, where you're just holding the parries down, and if someone attacks you while you're holding it, you'll parry.
Yeah, I would actually equate it more to Gil and Ryu's parry V skills in Street Fighter 5, because I think it's going to work very similarly. It actually refills your drive gauge when done successfully, and you can actually dash cancel from it, but that's a whole different mechanic mechanic here, but I couldn't find the citation, but I believe the parry window was increased from New Generation and Second Impact, Street Fighter 3 to Third Strike to be a few frames longer, making them easier to do. And for people who weren't doing that back in the day, who weren't playing that game, like parries were not that big of a thing until Third Strike came around. Like that's when you started seeing people use them all the time, like, and use them very often. So how big the parry window here is going to indicate how strong or weak this technique is overall.
This is something you can hold down, and you can just be in a parry state, and it drains your meter.
Will it just continually drain the meter when that happens?
Yeah, so you can just, if you wanted to, round one, fight, you could hold down, the command is medium punch and medium kick, and you will just be parrying, but your drive meter will then just be going down. And so it's like a state that you're in as long as you're holding this. But then there's a second component to it where if you perfect parry, John, Popcorn John.
Yeah. Okay. Well, perfect. Yeah. No, that's great. I didn't realize it was that way. I was taking it more in the Street Fighter 5 fashion. But you're right. It's more like the Alex one. So it's quite interesting. But also with the perfect parry, restoring the things and all that kind of stuff, it will be interesting to see. For an example, here is Gil's parry is considered amazing in Street Fighter 5 and it's 2 frames. Ryu's is considered really crappy and it's 3 frames. 1 frame of difference makes a huge impact here. So doing a perfect parry, is it a frame perfect thing? It might be. Is it within 2 frames? Is it within 3 frames? All these details are going to matter when it comes down to it, along with holding it and stuff like that, and then draining your meter and stuff. Like, do you want to spend that much time just draining away? There's going to be some kind of animation with it. There's going to be some kind of recovery with it. And what happens with Ryu and Gil when they whiff the animation is you can crush counter them. You can blow them up afterwards. So if you're coming out of the parry animation, like you let go of it, and then all of a sudden your opponent rushes in with Balrog or does whatever. Shout out to Balrog not being in there, but you might get blown up for it in a whole different way.
I do think that we are absolutely gonna see at the beginning and scrubby. Well, I don't even want to say scrubby players, but a lot of players will for the start of this use parry as an anti-air because it's a pretty legit kind of a thing to try to do here. And you see that with give a character a parry and you see players using it as an anti-air. I did the same thing with Gouken, and it's like, yeah, that works for a while, but then also you start seeing empty jumps and whatnot. I do think the fact that you can just hold this down is probably gonna be too strong as things begin. It better drain a lot of meter really fast or something like that to try to counter that, because just being able to go into a parry state, that's going to beat a lot of players until they get past a certain skill and are able to defeat that and however we're going to do that, probably just empty jump throw or something. But this looks really strong, especially for newer players. Like the fact that you can just go into parry is a little bit scary to me, so they better balance this a decent bit. But the fact that perfect parries are a thing, that's that second level of, okay, this is how pros are going to use it. Pros aren't probably going to sit there holding stuff. They're probably going to be trying to perfect parry anything and everything because it's going to be the most efficient, and you're going to get bonus of some of the drive cost back and things like that, and probably better advantage, things along those lines. So it's going to be all about perfect parries for higher level players, but man, that it's going to make lower level and even medium level matches interesting to see the other component of it.
Yeah, the devil in the details is very important here in terms of like what kind of recovery it has. Like, do you enter a counter hit state once you're out of it? And that means bigger combos and bigger other things. Like that is what we've seen here in other games. And the huge difference here in Third Strike is there was no animation here in Third Strike. It looked just like walking forward or holding down and stuff. There was no button to be held. And one of the biggest things about like Zangief from Super Street Fighter 2 to Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo is he got a whiff animation for his SPD. And at the time, we're like, why does Geef need a whiff animation if he, misses it?
That sounds so foreign to me now.
Yeah, but you could do all these option selects and all these other things that people realized, and it was basically to counteract what at the time was super high level play. And like no one knew that you could do that stuff, and it was just and so that's why I'm not too worried about the parries being just completely overpowering, except in this one regard, and that is with fireballs. Yes. I'm worried that it's going to be too negating of a factor with fireballs, but if they do something like, fireballs no matter what will always do gray health damage or something of the like, that was well done in Street Fighter 4, where you could absorb a couple fireballs, but after you did maybe 2 or 3, you did not want to absorb anymore because the risk of just losing half your health or whatever was just too gigantic. And that was a really good way of making fireballs still impactful in Street Fighter 4 and not being just entirely a nothing burger.
Yeah, I think they've learned that particular lesson, and it sounds like the perfect thing to pair with the parry. So, all right, so then this is interesting to me, and I'm not sure how to feel about this. The fact that basically your EX moves are also tied to this mechanic and this 1 meter. So thus far, if you want to do the impact move, if you want to pull off a parry or go into the parry state, you're using one of 6 bars to a certain degree. If you want to do EX moves, you're using 2 bars of that 6 every time you want to use an EX.
Yeah, to me, this jumps out as EX moves being the dominant moves that they've been in Street Fighter 4 and Street Fighter 5 are going away. And I think that they're going to be more of a helper style enhanced, EX is what that stands for. But in Third Strike, basically, EX moves were good, but they were not the dominating factors that they've been in 4 and 5. In that, I think we're going to see a return to that. So stuff like, Bison's EX Stomp, for example. Bison gets in the game later on, which you probably will at some point, Ghost Bison or whatever. That takes off like 5,000 damage, and, it starts up at like 2 frames and all this other kind of crap. Like, I don't think that's going to be this case when you're able to do 3 EX moves right at the very start of each round. That's a big deal, and I can't see Capcom looking at that and going, okay, we're going to make these EX moves super powerful. Like, it's more the Third Strike version of these.
This will, you're absolutely right, affect how the match flows in a very significant way. You're right. I think this will be a departure from how we've seen Street Fighter matches flow, given EX moves have been such an important part of things, because it's like, yeah, you can play that way, but that also means you're not going to have access to most of the other 4 huge important components of the drive mechanic will be off limits to you, because if you use all 6 of these drive bars, let's say, and they do recover over time, but we don't know how quickly. If you use all 6, you go into this exhaustion mode, and I'm sure you don't want to be there, right? So you really have to be managing this both on offense and on defense.
I wanted to talk a little bit about EX moves generally blowing through fireballs and other specials. That's kind of like one of the most notorious things. If you really want to negate fireballs and have them not be a thing, you're going to make these EX moves like just blow through them like they do in these other games. I think that that's going to be a property more so as supers now, where if you want to blow through fireballs, if you want the invincibility, you're not going to get them from EX moves. And again, if you get them from EX moves, I'm going to be shocked, but like I can't see that being the case now. Not when you get 3 of them at the start of the rounds for free, basically. And yeah, you can enter the exhaustion state, you can do all the kind of other stuff, but it's like, man, I really think EX moves are going to be quite a bit more watered down than what we've seen now.
Yeah, and I think that super, whatever that is, I think it's going to be its own meter, and I do think that's going to be more the comeback mechanic of anything. That's going to be like I'm in a bad situation, here's my Hail Mary move to try to swing things around. And I think that we've also sort of been used to that and found that even though it was scrubby when it came out in Street Fighter 2 and people didn't necessarily like Ultras in 4, I think that that's like a pretty happy medium to be at with like, okay, you get this one big shot once in a while, it's going to be the difference maker, but really it's not going to be some like, now I'm in a super awesome, amazing plus situation where you got to guess for the game even though you've been beating me for everything else. So, but anyways, on to Drive Rush.
Okay, so Drive Rush lets you do a dash forward costing either 1 bar if you do it from a parry. So basically, you parry successfully and then you double tap forward and you take one of your drive gauges away. Or you can do it from a normal. So let's say reuse crouching medium kick. You can take 3 of your drive gauge bars and spin them to dash forward. And more than likely, I think that the canceling from a normal is going to be one, it's very costly. You're spending half of your drive gauge to do it.
Half.
But I also think it's going to be fairly negative. That's mostly, I mean, we're kind of used to Street Fighter 5 where you stick it out there a normal and then you activate and you're plus 1 billion, right? I don't think in this case that they're going to let you do that twice and be hella plus. I think there's going to be a few moves that let you do it, but for the most part, I think if you cancel from a normal and you dash up, most dashes are around 18 to 22 frames or whatever. You're going to be like -5 or somewhere around there.
Oh, no way, man, because 3 stocks to do it. If that's the case, I'm not doing that stuff, but I think that, and also you couldn't do it twice in a row. Like you couldn't do fish, see if it hits, I'll call it FADC drive rush, and then do it again, because then you're already out you're already out of meter if you started for full. I think that the fact that it costs 3 is a huge cost, and it better give you something worthwhile. I do think that this will be for...
Take Zangief, for example. You're saying you wouldn't do it, but take Zangief. Say he does a crouching medium kick, he drive rushes, sorry, let me get it in there, and then he's right up in your face, and he has the ability to SPD you and whatever and stuff, and maybe he's -5, but he's outside of any of your punish ranges. That's worth it for Geef to potentially get off like his, level 3 super or whatever. There's a bunch of opportunities for the more rushdown characters who want to be in your face. They've got 2 free opportunities, relatively speaking, to get up in your face. But if you're playing someone like a Gouken or a Ryu or something, I can't see it being as useful. But I mean, we are coming from the era of Street Fighter V where you want to be in the opponent's face because of the Okazemi and other stuff. It's very advantageous.
Yeah, and we'll see. We'll see how they play, because yeah, I can see with like a grappler, basically a free in where he's still plus or she's still plus, it would be very scary. But there's a lot more to it, to like how easy is it for them to get to that position in the first place. And again, I don't think they can use it twice in a row. I think that it depends on how long it takes to get that extra bar, so they have 4 and they can use it again to not get exhausted.
Oh, it's three bars.
Right, I'm saying that they use it once, they're down to 3 if they were full. They can't use it again, they'll go exhausted. They have to let 1 more bar come back before they could use it again.
Yeah, the exhaustion, that's an interesting thing. I don't know what that's going to mean. They say that's big disadvantages for not having it, and I don't know if that just means like you can't spend any of the drive at that point, and that's what the disadvantages are. If they say the exhausted state, like what does that mean? Do you take double damage or something like that? It's an interesting thing that I'd like to see explored more.
Yeah, maybe you're slower, maybe you can't block.
So many things that could be. But yeah, it's just coming from the Street Fighter V era. It's like, well, people won't bet that, and I'm like, oh yeah, they will. Like they will bet everything.
Yes, we will.
Yes, yeah, I will bet it, even if I should not bet it a million times. I'm betting it. Boom. So one other thing I want to say about drive rush is, because we compare this to FADC, one of the most important things to point out early on is it does not look like you can do this out of special moves. And FADCs were so often used to FADC out of things like DPs and make special moves safe. That does not look like what the opportunity is here. I think that the main reason that you're going to use drive rush from a normal attack is to extend a combo. So you see your normals are hitting and you go, okay, I'm going to tack on whatever else I can to this combo at the cost of 3 bars. But it also looks like it's going to make parries. I bet you that you don't have a huge advantage from parries when you normally get them, but pairing them with drive rush will probably be where you get the kind of advantage that we see like awesome like third strike, parry counter sequences. I think you're going to probably have to pair both the parry and the drive rush together to get those kinds of things, and that'll be interesting. It depends on the move, depends on the recovery and all that kind of stuff, but so much potential here. And this kind of a thing you get into, like, this is advanced level play, but you also got the very basic, like, newer players can use the hold down the parry thing. So there's a little something for everybody so far that we've seen, and the potential to take your Street Fighter 6 game from one level to another. But this takes us to the last of the quick
5
example before we move on for drive rush is I think that Laura is a really good test case for Street Fighter 5, because she has the command dash, and so you can go crouching medium kick and then do a command dash, and she'll be right up in your face, but she'll be like -5 or whatever, or -10 and stuff. Like, it's unsafe, but you will see Laura players do it on numerous occasions, because depending on spacing, timing, and if just someone's not ready for it, you can be right there. And especially when she gets in her V trigger sequences and it's got a bunch of meter and stuff, it's worth it for her to bet it then. Usually it's not always worth it, but it's Laura players, so they're gonna bet it anyway. So yeah. So drive reversal, yes, yeah. Alpha counter, V reversal. It's pretty much exactly what you would think of there. Yeah, go for it.
These have been traditionally, like, they're certainly useful, but very easily counterable. At least in Street Fighter V, I think they were a little better when they were alpha counters, but I'm not sure. I didn't really play and live through that particular chapter.
The big difference is, yes, alpha counters were fully invincible and pretty hard to counter, where V reversals were partially invincible, could be whip punish, and you can throw them.
Okay. So, and we don't know if some of these are going to be strikes while others are just evasions, because we got a mix of both in Street Fighter V, and that was kind of significant. It really sucked early on to just have an evasion one, but I think that Capcom maybe did a little bit to cinch that up a bit. But yeah, as far as we can tell, it's V reversal, it's alpha counter, and I think this might be one of the weakest of the 5 components. Although, what does that even mean? Like they all have different functions, but a few are defensive, a few are offensive. And I've seen some rumblings from some pretty high level and notable players, notably Alex Valle and Daigo, both expressed some concern that this drive system will make the game more defensive than offensive, and that might not be a very good thing. We got into it a little bit with the whole you can parry fireballs, so that's gonna, what that's gonna do to zoning. But how do you feel about what it looks like in terms of the balance between defense and offense with the drive system?
If someone releases a modern AAA fighting game that's more defensive than offensive, I'll be shocked. And good luck on your sales if you guys do that, because I don't think it's going to go over well. People want big, explosive fireworks in these games. They want it to be fairly offensive, more than defensive. And I think the best case scenario is a 60-40 split. And I mean, it's just people want offense. And yeah, I mean, I could be worried about it all the other way because, like the overdrive where you get 3 EX moves at the very start, right? There's so many things that could go that way. And yeah, it's really, how do you feel? Like that's how I feel. I'm curious how you're going with it.
It's really early, right? Of course, but it's so much of it comes down to the particulars. Right now, when I look at it, I go, okay, the impact is an offensive one, parry is a defensive one, overdrive is kind of both, rush is more of an offensive, reversal is defensive. So there's there's representation of both sides across this entire mechanic. But like, okay, so if the reversal comes to fruition similar to what it's like in Street Fighter 5, you go, okay, so that's one of the weaker ones. You're probably not going to spend as much of your drive gauge on that as you are, and like the one will probably emerge as the most important part, similar to like, you used your V meter for a bunch of stuff in 5, but really you used your V meter for V triggers more than anything else. And best case scenario is that the utility of all of these are balanced, so you really do get a nuanced decision-making, problem-solving process of managing all of this as the round moves forward. Yeah. That's best case scenario. So right now, the fact that overdrive or EX moves, because all of my experience has been Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5, when it comes to competitive play and really, submerging yourself into all of this, and I go, everything is going to go to EX moves for the most part, and then maybe some anti-air parries is what we're going to see. But maybe impact is really good. Maybe that rush is like where it's all at, and you're saving most of your meter for doing things based on rush. So I don't know, but I'm hoping that because they have a couple of different places to put defense and offense, that they'll give equal treatment to all of them. So
I look at this as it's going to come down to player style and preference more so, and then character style. Like, for example, the drive reversals, the alpha counters, those don't sound all that great. Maybe if you're playing, Ryu or something like that. Like, why would you spin it on that when you can do, some EX fireballs and other things? Like, those are going to be way better, right? But if you're playing Dalsum and someone gets in on you and you're able to push them back 3 times, with this thing, that's a pretty big deal. And especially if, you're like Arturo, like a very defensive player to begin with, not an offensive Dalsum player. And it's like, oh man, like I'm going to abuse the heck out of this. But I know like Dream King used to play like Dudley in Street Fighter 4 and he loved to focus attack. And like, so he might spend all of his meter literally on just doing drive impacts over and over and over again, because the one time he gets it, it's like you're dead. Right. And so I do think that this actually does remind me of kind of the ISM system, except you don't select it at the character select screen. You're basically picking those options in game, and you're picking offense or defense depending on whatever style of play that you want to do. That's how it's striking me. I really think it's going to come down mostly to player preference, but you are going to see some extremes of people going hardcore on offense and on defense and having a lot of resources to be able to do so, because, man, being geared up with 6 full on meter, full on everything right from the start, it's a really interesting design decision. Hope it works for him. I'm pretty skeptical on that one. Again, I've already mentioned vanilla balance is going to be there's going to be one dominant style. There's going to be some Nash or Chun-Li in there from like Street Fighter 5 that's just wrecking people, and then how quickly will Capcom update that? So
yeah, there's so many different ways that it could go off of the path, and we don't know. I don't think for sure that you start with a full meter. Maybe you start with 3 and both people are, maybe you back off and you let go up to 4 before you really engage, things like that. Who knows?
Oh, you mean with the drive gauge?
Yeah,
you start with 6.
So, for sure, you start with 6.
They say that you start with a full 6. So
Okay. So one of the things about this, though, and this kind of ties back to what we were initially talking about, is that I don't think that this is as much of a comeback mechanic as the others that we talked about. And one of the things about Street Fighter V specifically, and you could say this for 4 too, the minute that you have access to the big, powerful comeback thing, and you're getting that because you've been hit, there is this stark change in the round, in the flow of things.
Yes.
In and of itself, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's kind of, because so I'm wailing away at Akuma, right? And I've cornered him. This is Street Fighter V. I've cornered him. I've got him where I want him, but then he's got meter because I've done that last combo, and that gave him V-trigger potential. Now that Akuma has the option to go for a sweep, which is normally a very unsafe move, but he can cancel that. So it becomes one of the absolute best moves in the game.
Yes.
It's a crush counter knockdown that's not only safe, but once you block it, he's now got a plus situation to follow up on. And it's like, now that I know that, I have to start playing outside of sweep range. And it used to be that Akuma could activate it off of fireball too. So you'd pack up from sweep and then you'd throw a fireball, and that was really broken, guys. I don't know if you remember. Anyways, point is, there was such a stark change in how you had to play once this meter filled up, and it filled up because you were doing well. That doesn't look like it's going to be as much of a thing here in Street Fighter 6, because you have this meter and you essentially have it in the same capacity throughout the round, and it's up to you to manage it, use it where you will and such. But it's going to make for a more dynamic and more like of a varied and versatile flowing round, where it kind of more comes down to player decisions, as opposed to, well, once we get 3/4 of the way through the health bars, it changes into this. And the thing that it changes into, man, if that's not fun, or if that feels like it leaves you robbed or whatever, that's a bad look. So
yeah, that's definitely happening. So yeah, it's
it's. Why do you think that's definitely happening?
I mean, okay, so you take something like that. Let's say the drive impact. That's the focus attack system, right? And what's going to happen with the meta is, like, people are going to figure out how that's broken. Like, what's the cheap stuff? What is the dirty stuff in fighting games? We always do it, right? Well, who's high tier? Who has really dirty stuff that I can just replicate and just scrub people out with for a long time, right? That is coming, and that is oftentimes what these games are defined at. Like, the developers, it's like Vanilla Sagat. We've talked about him, not that long ago. Like, they knew all the cheap crap he could do, and they left it in the game because they were like, people aren't going to abuse this. They're not going to go crazy and stuff on it. They did. Same thing with Chun-Li, Ryu, Nash, and Street Fighter V. They're going to find the cheap stuff, and they're going to abuse the heck out of it. And it might be that the community develops counters, or it might be that Capcom's actually got to step in and adjust it. But all this cheap stuff, we're going to find tons of cheap stuff from the get-go and think it's amazing. It's like the people who said, like, they felt like they mastered Street Fighter V in 20 minutes. Shouts to them, and then they don't place a tournament. It's the overreactions, the fear. I mean, it's all well placed. It's all like, oh yeah, that's 100% going to happen, because history always repeats itself in these games. This is what we experience. It's just like, long term, how is the pendulum going to swing? How is it going to be as lopsided and chaotic as Street Fighter V? Hopefully not. Hopefully they're getting away from that. But again, I've said it before. If offense is the bias for fighting game developers, and if you don't believe me, look around. Most of the games that are successful, the ones that have the biggest sales, they are keyed more towards offense than defense.
Sure, but still, my point stands that it doesn't sound like it's just going to be a matter-of-fact sudden switch in the flow and the pace of a round because some new aspect becomes unlocked. And it's not to say that this won't surely have its issues. Maybe it's like it's way too powerful from the beginning of the round. Maybe it makes it so that, like, everybody's just using parry all the time, and that's taking away from all the other, like, who knows what the issue is going to be. But as far as Capcom learning the most immediate lesson, because I would say in Street Fighter 4 they learned the lesson of, like, kind of vortex and of option selects, and they made it a point in Street Fighter 5 to not have those things. There are other problems for sure, and I think the problem in Street Fighter 5 is the V-trigger comeback. The ending of the rounds were way more important and had a lot more gravity than the beginning of the rounds, and I think this is evidence of them attending directly to that, and I don't think that particular issue is going to manifest. I think they've been paying attention to that. Others, I'm sure, will pop up, but I don't think we're going to be dealing with that as much based on what we know so far about this gameplay mechanic.
If Street Fighter V is a 8 out of 10 in terms of V triggers being that dominant and that good, I can see Street Fighter 6 being like a 6 out of 10 or something like that. It will be a step down, but this is how fighting games work. It's you're gonna find the cheap stuff and you're gonna do it on your opponent. And like supers being 3 bars now, and unleashing, like I'm having visions of Marvel in my head right now, and I love Marvel, so I mean this is perfect for me. But it's like players are going to find the cheap stuff and they're going to do it on you. It's like if I can win by doing it, I'm gonna freaking do it. If it's in the game, don't complain, as they say, right? It's V triggers aren't going to be in this game, and thank goodness I think we've got enough of that in Street Fighter 5. But people are going to find the next thing. Life finds a way, John. Life finds a way. Cheapness finds a way. They're going to do this, and it's like we just don't know what it is yet, in my opinion.
Yes, but that issue that's been plaguing us probably won't be as much of an issue this time around. It'll just have different clothes on and look a little bit different, but
Touché.
Maybe that'll be a bit refreshing. Yeah? And then my other big thing about this is that it looks like it's going to be, it's definitely going to be much more universal than the V system. Now, it's not going to be completely universal because, say, the drive impact or focus attacks. Remember, not all focus attacks were created equal. Some reached farther than others. I think maybe, who knows if some characters get 2 hits of armor, some characters reach farther, some characters can do it faster, whatever, and that's going to make discrepancies. But and also a huge part of this is how important is the particular mechanic or the part of the mechanic you're talking about to a character's ability overall, right? And so V triggers were super important to that in Street Fighter 5. You could almost make the tier list based on V triggers at a certain point. There was exceptions, but like you knew that a big reason why Urien was always so high was because when he got V trigger, that meant he got 2 Aegis reflectors and what he could do with that. Now when Vega got V trigger, he got 1 Rose, and what could he do with that? Well, he hung out at mid-low tier the entirety of the life of Street Fighter.
He could slide and make it safe, John. That's what Vega could do, and that was
pretty
100% what he was going to do. That was.
Oh man, the meme. And then with V skills too. V skills were quite important. And Nikali had a V skill that was incredibly versatile. He used it in neutral, he used it in defense, he used it in offense, and all over the place. And he used that to build his V trigger. It was actually a pretty good little system there. And then you had Armika, who had a microphone that was very specific. It was only a certain amount of time she was getting her V trigger most of the time from getting hit. And because that was such an important part of the game, that affected those characters drastically differently. Now you're not going to have that big of a disparity with what we're seeing so far in the drive system, because everyone's gonna have the ability to parry, everyone's gonna have the ability to FADC or whatever, everyone's gonna have these same basic things. They might look a little bit different and they might serve different characters differently. Of course they're going to do that. Characters that are more about multi-hit combos are probably going to use that the drive and the FADC more than others, and it's going to be more valuable to them, and that's okay too. You want some variety. You don't want everybody just doing the exact same thing and have the exact same character with the exact same normals. But I do like that they're starting with something a little more simple where the differences might not echo as hard as they did in Street Fighter 5.
Yeah, it's man, I'm going back to the groove system and SNK, Capcom versus SNK 2, and then like the Exism system. There's going to be so many ways to play this game, and hopefully no one way is super dominant. That would be the hope here. I really think that if that's going to be the case, Capcom's going to have to be very active about patching this game. But we just saw them do that with Luke, where we were, and a bunch of other people were saying, hey, Luke is too damn strong. Shouts to you there. You led that charge for EventHubs, and they went in and addressed it right away. And if that is going to be their mentality with Street Fighter 6, I have a lot more faith in the game being better in the vanilla version, the first year out. But a lot of times, again, speaking with the developers on this stuff, they're like, we don't even know what we have. We don't even know what we've created, kind of thing. And I'll quote Jurassic Park again. It's like, you kept wondering about if you could, you never asked if you should, kind of thing, right? And that there's a lot to that when these games are first kind of coming to life. And again, the developers, they create something and then the community takes a while. They're hostile towards it initially, but then as they learn to embrace it and enjoy it, they're like, well, that's actually what makes the game fun. This is a huge part of the game. It's too watered down if you don't have it in this way and stuff. Like there's all these factors coming in yet. So, again, and there's so much we don't know yet. So I'm I think there's going to be a lot of variety in this game just for the core mechanics. It's definitely much more technical than what Street Fighter V was from the get-go. And where the games end up and stuff like that. Street Fighter V's technicality falls in other areas versus not mechanics, but in kind of the spacing, the timing, other stuff. That's where the technicality comes in. And if you can convert off of straight hits, much like Marvel, that's where it comes in. And in this game, it looks like it's going to be much more akin to a Street Fighter 4 or Street Fighter 3, where the technicality is in the mechanics itself, and like how well you use them and how good your execution is and stuff, which is just fine. I mean, that's much more of a tried and true Street Fighter game.
Well, I don't have too much more to say, but I do have something that ties right into what you're saying there, because there's been a major effort by developers to kind of appeal to both the green new general players and then also the tried and true competitive people that have been playing for a long time. And in Street Fighter V, it felt like a lot of what they did to try to close that gap, they did directly into the game's main mechanic. They made it very easy to do. They made it so it would soup up really, the canceling of V-triggers into, like the sweep thing I was talking about earlier, make a really unsafe, really usable move super safe and even more advantageous. And then you can also melt life bars with it. So they tied the game's main mechanic to also appealing to the greener players. This time, they're attending to the greener players by giving them a simplified control scheme, which at first looks really scary, but then you realize that it's also extremely limited. You're going to lose the different, like if you get a single input a DP, it's like great, but you don't get light and heavy. You only get like the medium version, and that's the only DP you can do. So it's very limited, and I don't think anyone that's really playing competitively will even entertain all of that. I sure hope not. But point is, you can play, training wheels Street Fighter 6. This is what it looks like. And without it having to be part of the core thing. But those who want to seriously dig into it, really explore this, like you're saying, a much more technical and demanding, it appears, basic mechanic, that's all there for the advanced players to do, and it's separate enough. So I think they're doing a better job at this early stage of attending to the new players and then giving the older players the technical skill-based stuff that they want. And hopefully both are happy, both are excited to play, and the game isn't hindered in either front by the other one.
Yeah, and with simplified controls, they might even do something so, like, there's a cooldown window of like how many TPs you can do, or maybe there's reduced damage, all this other kind of stuff. We've seen in numerous other games tackle these in a variety of ways. So I'm really not worried about simplified controls. And if that's their way of closing the skill gap, more power to them. That's definitely the healthiest way I've seen of doing it in recent times.
Yeah, I'm just glad that it's not married to the main mechanic of the whole system. It's not part of the engine, so. Yeah.